All right, guys, welcome back. We are at episode 10 of the Speed Up and Get Your Hits podcast. We're back to our normal crew this week. I am Billy with SpecTrain, and with me, as always, I have Nick, Velox Training Group, and Brennan from Vortex Edge. And we're excited to be back together doing another episode this week. This week's a bit of another kind of unusual episode. We're going to change up the format ever so slightly. We're going to kind of skip a title discussion, if you will, that we come up with, and instead we asked you guys this week on the gram, if you will. Hey, what would you like to hear us kind of talk about? What questions do you have? What are some topics? Nothing came up that I think is going to really take up the whole episode, but definitely got a few interesting things from you folks that we're going to discuss and try to throw out some knowledge there. Shameless plug, I would say at least half of the questions that I got we've already answered in depth in some previous episodes of the podcast. So if we don't get to your question, make sure to look back at some of those earlier episodes, and chances are we may have covered it already. We're probably have about maybe 15 hours of content out in the podcast by the time this episode gets posted. So there we've covered a bunch of stuff in pretty long form. So we had a lot of questions about concealment, about dry fire. We just finished up our at the time we're recording this, the last episode we posted was our dry fire deep dive episode where we really answered a lot of those questions I got from you guys. So I would definitely say check that one out for sure. But tonight, what we're going to do is we're going to skip straight to kind of this week in shooting, and then we'll get to your questions and see how many we get through in the next little bit here on the podcast. I'll kick it off really quick. So for my this week in shooting, I kind of have a quick gear thing that I've been playing around that I thought might be helpful for folks, or you might be interested in. This is kind of the latest, if you will, action cam that's kind of taken specifically competitive shooting by storm, but it's super, super cool. What's cool about it is super small and light, right? Hopefully my camera will kind of focus on this a little bit. So that's literally all it is. Super, super tiny light camera that is magnetic. So it's got all magnetic mounts, including a pretty handy hat mount that is just, a friction mount that works super well when you're, for competition shooting, whatever it is. I've really, really enjoyed over the past few months playing around with a lot of first person video. There's a lot of things I think that you can learn and see what you're doing from good first person video that you can't necessarily see quite as well from third person, specifically with vision, right? What is my head doing? When is my head leaving the target versus when the shot's breaking? Where am I looking? What am I seeing? How's the gun moving? You can see how the gun's moving, how it's arriving at the target a little bit better a lot of times than you can in third person. Is it really just arriving and stopping on a spot, or is it kind of, circling around, or what's happening when the gun arrives in different places? This camera does a great job of it. The reason I've used the GoPros and that kind of stuff, but those are kind of big and heavy, and you feel like you got a brick on your head when you're throwing your head around, right? Which can be kind of irritating. So these are really cool. I've enjoyed it a lot. It's super quick and easy. If you're using it on competition stages like that, you pop it in your hat mount. You literally press the button once, and it turns on and starts filming video. And then when you're done, you just turn it back off by hitting the exact same button. So it's super easy, simple to use. Got the cool little charging case. It also works with, any GoPro shoe style mount. So you can use any of those kind of mounts if you want to mount it on a rifle or in a shoot house or whatever. So anyway, thought some folks might be interested in that. That's what I got for this week. I've been playing around with it, been pretty happy with it so far. So pretty cool little camera. My latest videos I posted from SC section on the gram are using that camera. They're obviously nowhere near full quality because of the gram, but that'll give you an idea of what it looks like. Been working out pretty cool so far. So that's what I got.
Cool. I like it.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Yep. Yes, I am. I'm enjoying it a lot. Pretty cool. What about you guys? What you got? What you been up to?
I've been playing with a bunch of rifle stuff here lately.
Rifle stuff.
Specifically because you see a lot of people that always say like, "Hey, rifle is a lot faster than shooting a pistol," right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm like, I wonder if that's true. I've never really gone out and written down times of specific things.
Yeah.
So been doing that a lot lately, and I don't know, man. I think what I have found is outside of like parking the gun on a target and ripping the trigger, yeah, that might be a little quicker. But dude, everything else is pretty much the same damn speed as a pistol. So
Yeah.
I don't know. Just stuff that I've been messing around with for classes and stuff to show people.
Super
Yeah,
interesting.
super interesting ideas to explore, right? I think we've been able to start exploring a lot of that head to head, but now that PCC is picking up popularity and USPSA, and there's actually some good carbine shooters that are running around and trying to be fast and accurate, which is pretty cool. Definitely, I think at closer range matches, PCCs tend not to win if there's good pistol shooters.
Yeah.
From what I've seen for the most part. Of course, there's a lot of tight manipulations in the way that USPSA stages are usually set up, which may be a little bit of a bias there. But like you said, at distance, right? You can definitely, I think, especially when you're shooting static, push your confirmation levels out farther with a rifle than you can with a pistol, right?
100%. Yeah.
Which you definitely notice a difference there. But yeah, I kind of agree with an experimentation I've done. Am I transitioning faster with a rifle? Probably not, right? And if I'm shooting on the move or anything like that, it almost, I think, cancels out the advantage as far as how far you can push out.
Yeah,
Those
100%.
splits and confirmation levels and so forth. So yeah, it really is. It really is interesting, especially at kind of those intermediate inside of 50-meter distances. How close pistols and rifles are a lot of times, I think. But then there's guys like Maxio Grandis that shoot partial swingers on the run at 35 yards, and I start thinking maybe I just haven't unlocked all the potential out of my long guns yet, But we'll see. Cool.
Yeah. So, I guess this we'll have the podcast previous from this. We'll make this apparent, but we at Vortex Edge hosted Billy to come up and put on a 2-day competition class, which was really great as expected. I think all the guys learned a bunch of stuff and got a bunch of homework, which is sweet. But for kind of my segment of this week in shooting, the third day that Billy was up, so we left the final stage from the competition up, and we went and shot it under nods, which is pretty cool. And Billy, I think you said that was the first time doing any sort of run and gun type stuff under nods, right? You did static stuff.
Yeah, shot under nods before, but never ran any stages or anything like that. So that was a lot of fun. That was pretty cool.
So that was cool, right? So we did with pistols and we did with rifles, and kind of to Nick's point with doing stuff with rifles and kind of comparing the speed of stuff. It was pretty interesting for me to, we hit factored it and everything. And obviously it's not the same as shooting a rifle in the daylight, right? But it's also fairly comparable, and the scores were actually fairly comparable as well. So we're running an 11.5 gun with a maul on it, right? Pretty cool to see how quick you can kind of manipulate that gun around walls and barriers and transition. Of course, transitioning with nods on is a good bit harder, easier to overdrive and things. But I thought that was pretty cool. Honestly, the times were pretty competitive within a second or two. For being in the dark, I thought that was pretty cool. So I think that's stuff that I want to explore more too. Is just how competitive can I be with myself, my pistol times or my pistol hit factors with with my carbine, or then even just shut the lights off and see what I can do as far as keeping up with nods on. So I thought that was pretty cool. There's always stuff to play around with. There's always another thing to play around with to get better. But pretty interesting.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, it's definitely some interesting takeaways for me as well. Like I said, being pretty new to that, I was surprised to see. I think I ran it 18 seconds the day before and the day late, and I was running it 20 with nods on. I think that was just movement. That stage, based upon the class, was set up very specifically to be very challenging with the footwork. Very kind of tight windows you have to move through, very easy to have foot faults and step out of bounds and that kind of stuff, which obviously you can't really see in your peripheral vision where your feet are going through your tubes very well, right? So it's kind of a natural disadvantage there, but the shooting part, like you said, roughly pretty much the same. So Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was pretty cool. Cool. Right on, guys. Well, I guess let's dive in. Unless you guys have anything else on that, into our questions for the night. A lot of interesting things to dive into.
Let's do it.
I think we'll just go rapid fire. I'll read them out, and I'll let you guys take first crack at them, I guess, for most of these, and then I'll back clean up if I got anything to add on. Which I tend to have thoughts on all the things, so but we'll see. The first one. This was a good one. What is a good training frequency given ammo prices and range access? Indoor versus outdoor or mix? Interesting question there, but I guess I'd love to hear you guys' thoughts on specifically in live fire. Obviously, be doing all the dry fire, right? Because that has nothing to do with ammo prices and range access. But for our live fire training, what do you think is there minimums for maybe folks that are concealed carrying and just want to be proficient? How often do you like to see folks hitting the range, or what kind of round counts you think are good, or what are your recommendations in that kind of area?
Man, that is so dependent on the person and the skill level that they're at, man.
Mm-hmm.
And it also depends on what they're trying to accomplish when they're at the range.
100%.
And do they know what they're trying to accomplish at the range and why?
There is
and
that
if you don't,
too, yeah.
if you don't, you should probably take a class.
Yeah.
But for me, like, I dry fire every day. So you
Right.
use me as an example, right? I dry fire every day. I've got a range at the house, but honestly, man, when I go down there, I probably only shoot maybe 200 rounds. And it's because of the frequency that I can go shoot. So I don't need days where I shoot 1,000 rounds anymore. I think it's probably more beneficial to go more often and shoot a little bit less, and use that live fire as a way to confirm what you've been doing with dry fire.
Mm-hmm.
So I know we stress dry fire a bunch on this, but like, if this is the first one of these that you're listening to, you need to be dry firing. If that is your question, you 100% need to be dry firing, and then using the range time as a way to confirm what you've been doing with your dry fire, right?
Yeah.
If you don't know what you should be dry firing, go back and listen to I think it was like episode 2. We like deep dive in the dry fire stuff. So that was a good episode.
We've done a couple.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's definitely some good dry fire content in there. Yep. Brennan, what you got, bro?
Yeah, so for me, like, I mean, it depends, right? Like Nick said. So, assuming you are dry firing, right? I think like if we set that out, like you are being pretty diligent, which I would say diligence would look like maybe minimum like 3 a week, right? 15 minutes at a time. I would say that's like, if you're serious about like getting better, right? And I assume that's like why you're going to the range. You want to get better in some way. Obviously, not everybody's going to be trying to get better on as aggressive a schedule as some other people, right? You may not be chasing something as hard as like Nick is, right? But if you are trying to improve every time, I'd be putting in a little work there. And then at the range, I think for me, it just matters whether or not those reps are quality reps or not, right? So there have been years where I've shot a lot of ammo. There have been years where I've shot like barely any. And there wasn't like a drastic difference in how much progress I was making, necessarily just directly tied to round count, or even necessarily range trip frequencies, right? So for me, it's so am I kind of putting in that time in the dry fire, right? And then when I get to the range, am I like getting something out of every rep? If I am getting things out of the reps, so like either confirming what I'm doing in dry fire, like Nick said, or pushing something, kind of exploration mode, speed mode, right? And discovering something new where it's like, okay, interesting. Like my dot does this under recoil when I grip the gun like this, right? I think that's super valuable stuff. Or whether you're just going to the range to kind of shoot in that match mode, execution mode, for real mode, right? Where you're going, do I still have it, right? Like, can I do the thing, right? And I think different range trips can maybe incorporate different, different elements of those, or kind of, split up your training day or your rounds into different sections where you're, maybe exploring stuff and then maybe just trying to straight up execute stuff. But man, I think if you're paying attention and not just there to just blast the target, make yourself feel good about shooting, I think you can get away with very little, honestly. I think you can get away with like 100 rounds a month, man. I really do. Like, I think that's on the low end. I would split that up probably like 2 trips of like 50. That's going to be short, right? But I'm going to be dry firing in between there, right? Some people can't get to the range two days a month, right? 1 day a month. I also think that's pretty good. Beyond that, I think it's just quite a bit harder. It falls off a little bit to where it gets quite a bit harder to make progress, in my opinion, unless you're like really pushing in dry fire. So that's what I got.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah, I definitely agree with I think the stuff that you guys are talking about. I think it's it's super important for us to realize, by us I mean guys that are do this in somewhat of a professional capacity or take this super seriously just because we want to or whatever it is, that some people actually have their priorities in order in life, and they have to consider things like budgets and time with family and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, look, man, I get it, right? And so you maybe look at me and you're like, hey, here's the amount of ammo that I have, to spend to shoot in over the course of a month, or I can only get to the range once a month or whatever. And it's like, yep, I get it. So like you guys said, main thing I would encourage folks to do is get as much value out of that time as you possibly can. The way you're getting that value, as you guys have said, is by dry firing. B, being super intentional with every round that's fired. I don't, for me personally, I can say when I go to the range and I'm burning ammo, like these days, I don't do things for fun at the range, right? I never shoot around at the range that isn't timed and scored anymore, right? Like I'm just being super intentional. I'm going there with a plan to work on specific skills, and I'm doing the best I can to get as much value back for every round that's fired on the range as possible. Another way you can do that is by doing dry fire on the range, as well. That can be super valuable to make sure you're getting as much value out of the rounds you're firing that you possibly can. So good stuff there. I think also I'll just add that I think it's super just for folks to set realistic goals if you do have some of those limitations. Brennan says, hey, you can get away with 100 rounds a month, and might you be able to get away with 100 rounds a month for skill maintenance? Yeah. Right. Maybe I struggle with that number a little bit. That's super low. Right. But maybe, right. But if someone comes to me and is like, hey man, I've got 250 rounds a month that I can fire on one range session, and I'm currently B class, but I want to make GM in the next 6 months. I'm going to go, no, you don't. Like you've got to change your goals, right? It's not going to happen, right? Because the fact of the matter is that your skill development is going to be directly linked to your level of participation, the amount of work you're putting in, right? And so you just got to have those realistic goals. So again, we can't tell you, the folks, listeners out there, how often you should be going to the range, how much work you should be putting in, how much you should be shooting, because we don't set your goals for you. But you got to get realistic with that, right? I think if you're really trying to make big gains, and you're trying to move forward, I mean, I think for me personally, whenever I was doing that, I was shooting at least 1,000 rounds a month, on the range, kind of as a minimum. These days I generally shoot a lot more than that, right? But I think that's kind of a good budget if you're thinking about, man, how much ammo should I be trying to get for the year, or how should I be spending that time? That's kind of a good minimum for me if I want to be making big strides forward. Again, if I want to do maintenance, cool. I can dry fire. I can go confirm those skills, at the range with some combined, standards drills or whatever it is. I can go home. Cool. Trying to get better. Unfortunately, it is one of those things where you do just have to put in the work. Once again, I agree with you guys. Frequency is just as important as volume, just due to the way that our brains work, right? If you want to stimulate those pathways and for things to change in the way that you work as a shooter, stimulating that growth as often as possible tends to be more fruitful, I think, than trying to do a ton of it at once. Now, again, there was times in my training when I knew, hey, I'm only going to make it to the range, once this month, right? So guess what? It's going to be a 1,200 round range session, right? And that, and if you have the discipline and you have the focus, I'm not saying you can't get value out of all those rounds, but if you can split that up, I think it's gonna be a lot better off. So cool. Lot of good stuff there. Any last thoughts on that?
Yeah, one thing that I left out is knowing when to stop.
Yeah.
When you go to the range with a plan, say you want to work on a specific drill or certain aspects of a specific drill, it's super important to use the metrics that we have on a flat range, which is speed and accuracy. And once that stuff is met, like if once your goals are met, freaking stop. Because I've had range days, and I'm sure you guys have too, where I'll meet it and I'm like, that type A personality comes out and I'm like, man, I wonder if I could beat that even more. And then I'll beat it and I'm like, man, I bet I can do even better than that. And then it just starts going downhill. And then at that point, I feel like you're just wasting bullets. So knowing where to stop, I think, is super important. And also, like, I feel like if you stop at a good place, it's confidence boosting too, right?
Yep.
If you go too far and then shit starts falling apart, that is not a confidence booster at all, right? So stop. I would stop when you're on a high and feel pretty good about yourself, instead of going down the rabbit hole of chasing times and stuff.
Yep. The other thing I was going to add to that, Billy, you brought it up, but the dry firing on the range thing is pretty huge. Like, I frequently get people kind of like talking to me about like, hey man, like how can I dry fire movement? How can I dry fire some of this more dynamic type stuff? Hey man, like the indoor range, which is the only range I have accessible, they don't allow any movement. What, right? Like, dude, well, first of all, like dry fire in your yard or your basement or somewhere where you can like move around, right? Like, like don't stand next to your bed, and try to get in like sprints or whatever, right? Unless you have a really big bedroom. But like if you have access to a range and you want to practice some of that stuff, and moving and running and stuff like that, do that with a dry gun on the range, set up targets, dry fire that a few times, right? Even like splitting that up into speed and like match mode, right? And then shoot it live fire. I think that's a great way to maximize your rounds. You kind of look nerdy doing it, but who gives a shit, right? You're getting better.
Yeah, no, 100%, right? Dry fire things on the range, again, then confirm it in live fire. That shortens the cycle of your training, and it makes it super, super consistent, right? And it's a great way to train yourself also to make sure that you're doing good, correct dry fire, right? If you do something in dry fire, you're like, oh, I just crushed that, and then you shoot it in live fire and you don't crush that, might be an indicator that your dry fire, you weren't being as honest with yourself as you should have been, right? And so you get immediate feedback on that. You can also be super creative with the way you're shooting drills, with only shooting certain rounds. They're going to give you the most important data. As just super granular example, let's say I had 2 shooting positions with an array of targets in front of both of them, and I'm really working, movement, right? I could just like draw the gun and shoot my first shot, and then, dry fire the rest of the targets in that array, run over my next position, dry fire those targets and shoot the last target to see what my total time is on that drill, right? But I'm missing, if I do that, a little bit of the data, and it's super, super important, right? So maybe I'll change that up. Maybe I'll draw the gun, I'll shoot my first shot on the target, dry fire, and then I'll also shoot the last shot before I exit that array, right? Shoot the last shot, and then I'll also shoot the first shot coming into the next position, dry fire some more, and shoot the last shot, right? Now I got my total time, I got my draw, I know how long it took me to shoot the first array, when I exited from the exit, how long it took me to get to the next spot, right? I'm getting a lot of super useful information there in 4 rounds.
Yep.
Right. So you can get super creative with it when you have limited ammo, for sure. So don't be afraid to look goofy when you're on the range.
You already do.
You already do. Yeah, you already do. Very cool. I got a couple questions asking for just kind of deep dives on specific things. A couple of these stacked together. This one is interesting. I'll read this word for word. Super detailed nuances of handgun grip technique.
How long we
Interesting to
got?
see. Yeah,
long we got?
right. Yeah, we could be here forever. The first thing I'll say, just really quickly, set the stage, right? My personal feeling, right? It's just there is no one way to grip a handgun, right? I think that is very, very well established when you look at some of the very, very, very best shooters out there in the world, and you notice that they all tend to grip the gun a little bit differently, if not in some cases drastically differently. Um, Part of that may just be that there's more than one way to do it. Part of it may be because there's variables in terms of how they're built, how long their arms are, how big their hands are, how strong they are, what kind of gun they're shooting, what load they're shooting, what are their priorities for how the gun behaves in terms of whether it's flat, whether it's accurate, whether it returns to zero effectively, right? And so there's a lot of different results you can get from different kind of grips, and different people value different things and choose different things there. So you've got to figure out as a shooter a grip that works, that accomplishes your goals as well as possible by understanding the principles of grip and then figuring out how to apply them with your hands and your gun, right? With that said, what's some deep dive nuanced stuff that you guys have found interesting, or maybe it's worked really well for you, or what you guys got on grip? Like I said, not going to be here all night, but we can go over a couple things.
Yeah, I mean, so for me, right, like I almost have a fundamental problem with doing a deep dive on grip, because like I think even among the three of us, we all do things pretty differently.
For sure.
I think what you said about like understanding the principles of grip is really key. And so I'll just say this, right? And this is what I teach in classes. There's kind of like three objectives with my grip, right? First, like I want to maximize two main things when I'm gripping the pistol. I want to maximize leverage. I want to maximize friction, right? And so that comes into hand placement and then grip pressures, right? I'm not going to jump down that rabbit hole personally right now.
Yeah.
The other thing is that I have to get a good grip, that optimal grip out of the holster, right? And so that has to be a grip that I can build consistently, like every time, and then also like very, very quickly, right? If I can do that, if I can build the grip consistently out of the holster, and then I'm maximizing leverage and friction in a way that is, like you said, Billy, right? Like specific to, could be quite specific to me, my body type, my hand shape, my hand size, all of that, the gun I'm shooting, my trigger. Those I think are what I found to be kind of non-negotiable, right? Like if you give up a bunch of leverage on the gun, that is not going to be a good grip, right? If you give up a bunch of friction on the gun, I haven't found a plus to that, like a pro to that. And man, you've got to be able to build it out of the holster. If you have some sort of grip that you can't achieve out of the holster quickly, you either need to do a lot more draw work and presentation work, or you need to figure out a better way to index onto that gun and get a good grip. That's all I'll say.
I think it would be interesting if you want to, Brendan. We had some really interesting conversations about grip last week.
Okay.
Possibly around, maybe some things you've changed in your grip here recently that have caused the gun to behave in a way that doesn't look as cool on the gram. But has allowed you to actually shoot a lot faster, maybe, and found some other advantages there with your grip. You want to maybe expand on that?
Yeah. Okay.
Slightly?
Yeah. Sure. So, it was interesting because I can't remember if we talked about on a podcast where we were talking about flat guns, or if that was just kind of chasing each other around on Instagram with some posts or whatnot. I can't remember which one it was, but for a while there, we were talking about like flat guns, right? And flat guns matter, right? And for those of you guys who are listening, right, flat gun meaning you see somebody gripping down that gun and just dumping rounds, and that slide is just cycling like a sewing machine, really flat. You're not hardly getting any muzzle rise. The gun's not like really rocking in your hands, right? So does that matter, right? different people have different opinions. I think we all have different opinions here on the podcast too. I used to think that mattered a lot, right? I used to think that, dude, like if the slide is just cycling straight back and forward, right, then that's less dot disturbance, which means I'm gonna be able to get on the trigger quicker. Right. That was my reasoning. Was I'm like the gun's waiting on me. I'm not waiting on the gun. Right. And if I've got all this muzzle rise, I must be waiting on the gun. Right. So also back then, like my best splits were like 18s. Okay. Right now, what I've been able to start achieving is like even in a build drill getting like 13s and 14s, right? And then like on doubles, like on a stage, like pretty like getting 13s and 12s, right? Like really consistently. What has allowed me to do that? For me, it was allowing the gun to do its thing, and kind of trusting the return of my pistol by loosening up my strong hand. Right. So I'm not death gripping this gun anymore. I'm not even really, I wouldn't say I'm even gripping it like all that firmly. I'm holding on to the gun and then I'm crushing with my left hand. What that's allowed me to do is I'm crushing so hard with my left hand that it's not allowing specifically these three fingers to input into the gun anymore. Right. Which is a problem for some shooters. Right. I'm crushing so hard with that left hand. And then this trigger finger is so loose that I can just kind of run that trigger. And as the gun recoils and comes back, that sets me up for the next shot really well, right? If you watch me shoot now, you will not see a flat gun. It does not honestly look all that impressive. I think Billy, the first time he'd see me shoot in a while, and he was like, dude, you're right. That gun's rocking all over the place, right? But I'll shoot doubles, man.
Yeah, so that's a bouncy boy right there.
Yeah, 100%, right? But
Yeah.
I'll shoot doubles, man, and my groups will be like that, right? Just right next to each other. Yeah, like easily 12 and 13 splits on doubles if I'm doing things right, right? So, like, is that necessarily wrong? Like, no, I don't think so, man. Like, it's unlocked another level of performance for me, right? Is that necessarily right for someone else? Yeah, maybe not, right? Maybe not. Maybe keeping that gun really flat. Like Billy tends to shoot that gun his gun a lot flatter. Yeah, I even let Chris shoot my M&P today, right? He shoots that M&P a lot flatter than I do too, but also like not as fast, not even as close, right? So, I don't know, man. Like there's different ways that you have to do, like experiment with your grip to see what actually yields you good results. For me, it was like putting it on timer. Dude, that's obviously faster. And guess what? My return to zero is like perfect, right? Yeah, that was all just exploration of grip. So kind of interesting.
Yep. Pretty cool. I think that the exploration of pressures is fascinating. Obviously, I think it's literally universally agreed upon that you crush the gun with your support hand, right?
Yep.
Firing hand gets a lot more controversial, a lot more different thoughts and so forth.
Yep.
And I think it's an individual thing. I think that a lot of people though will say, hey, you just need to hold the gun, essentially with your firing hand and get it nice and relaxed, that you have good trigger finger dexterity, but they have literally no idea what that actually feels like. Even if they think they're doing it, they have no idea what it feels like. I'll give you a super detailed, nuanced thing that I think is interesting, and it's worth people exploring, even if they don't do exactly this as their final technique. So, what I was is so what universally, what would not gripping the gun hard enough with your firing hand look like? Well, I think at a minimum, if the gun is moving inside of your firing hand while you're shooting it, you probably need to add a little bit more pressure within there, right? Or grab it differently or something to stop that from happening. So Haunted Kim actually had kind of a grip pressure exploration drill he put out not long ago that I thought was absolutely fascinating. And it works really well for folks that think that they are relaxing their firing hand, but really aren't, right? It is essentially kind of just single hand shooting. Don't even necessarily need a target. You're not going to worry about recoil control at all. You're just focusing on pulling the trigger and what your grip pressure is on the gun. You kind of start with your grip pressure where it normally is, the way we grip the gun, you pull the trigger, and then you just progressively, every single shot, just in slow fire, relax that grip by 10% until you do feel the gun move a little bit inside your grip, right? And you're like, okay, I've gone too far. And then you tighten it back up just to the point where it's not moving inside of your grip, right? And then you, with that pressure, without changing anything, crush on top with a support hand and shoot the gun. And I've seen some jaws drop when like a guy accidentally throws a 10 split after doing that, right? And it's pretty wild what the results sometimes are when you explore it and actually figure out, okay, what is the minimum amount required, pressure required with the firing hand. Again, I'm not suggesting for everybody universally you need to grip the gun that loosely all the time, right? But I think it's worth exploring for folks. I know Nick's got thoughts too. What you got, bro?
Oh man, grip. Let me take a deep breath. I got a lot on grip. Yeah. So I would start off with saying like, I would say grip for the majority of really, really hardcore shooters is a lifelong study. If you came to my class a year and a half ago, the way that I taught grip then and now is going to be different. I'd be willing to bet that if you came to a class of mine a year and a half from now, the way I teach grip then was most likely going to be different from the way I do it now, because everyone is always chasing grip and trying to get a better grip. That being said, kind of give you a little bit of the details of like how I grip the gun, right? I feel like as the slide reciprocates, right? I'm holding an airsoft gun here. As the slide reciprocates and the slide stops at the very back of the gun, all of that pressure is high and at the very back of the gun. So where I want my grip to be is high and at the back of the gun, right? So I want my palms to touch. I'm not one to try to grip the gun really far forward, because I don't feel like pistols recoil like rifles do. So I try to get at the very back of the pistol, right? Super hard, like we talked about with the support hand, not a whole lot with the shooting hand. More on that here in a second. I think elbows and shoulders are a big thing too, right? I think if I lock straight out like this and try to make, recoil come to like a hard stop, I don't think that's a really good gig at all. Because like you guys said, I don't think anyone can hold a gun completely still. So really what we're after in recoil management is trying to get that gun to return to zero really, really accurately. And by accurately, like if I have my dot on the perforated A in an A zone and I fire a shot, that thing should return right back down to that perforated A inside of that A zone, right? That's kind of what I'm after. The really loose support hand grip, like you guys mentioned that, or not support hand, firing hand grip. You guys mentioned that you can run really fast splits. What I've found with that is when I get really fast splits, that shit is really freaking accurate too, right? When they're really slow splits, that shit is no longer accurate, right? And there's a good reason for that. And the reason is because if you have really slow splits, right, and it's not accurate, what's most likely happening is you're probably gripping the gun as you're pulling the trigger, right? And if you're doing that, all of that pressure won't allow this finger to then come back off and then back on the trigger, right? So we want the shooting hand grip to be really, really loose, I guess you could say, like as loose as it can be, to kind of try to negate that, right? I think a really good test for this is, either trigger speed or trigger control at speed, dry fire drill, or shooting doubles, right? I shoot a ton of doubles in all of my classes. I even do it in rifle classes, right? And I tell everyone the same thing. Like if it's fast, it's most likely going to be accurate as well. I recently tested this at, I had freaking 78 ladies in Colorado. at a girl and a gun conference, right?
Yeah.
I had a freaking blast with them. But one in particular, I wish I videoed her. She was into her 70s, right? She was about 5 foot tall, has on a blue cowgirl hat, super nice lady, right? I just showed her how to grip the gun, and she was like, I don't know if I can get my hands that high because of arthritis and whatever. And I'm like, okay, just try to keep more pressure with your left hand, less with your right hand. And I want you to stare at where you want the bullets to go. Dude, she ripped 16 and 17 splits in doubles and had a freaking 4-inch group. Like, I wish I had it on camera.
Dude.
Both me and the RO were just standing in back of her like, oh my God. And the crazy part, man, like the gun was pretty damn flat. It was crazy. And I think it was just because she was just gripping it like I showed her, and she was unlocking her elbows and shoulders, kind of giving recoil a place to go rather than trying to hard stop it. So
Yep.
When you do that right, like you don't need all that many muscles to like run a gun pretty like really effectively, right? Like I think you're to the firing hand thing. The reason I back that pressure off is because tension like is the enemy of speed, right? And like not just my trigger finger too, but just like everything else. When I tense that hand up, right, I feel the muscles down through my forearm tense up, right? I have a tendency to start recruiting even like shoulder muscles because I'm squeezing something out there, right? And that firing hand has like a lot of other work to do that the support hand does not have to do, right? And it's really interesting. Like, man, it doesn't. I think we like picture like, yeah, every time you pick up a handgun, you've got to like squeeze the life out of it, right? And that there's pros and cons to it, but man, like it's amazing what you can get away with not all that much like actual strength going into the gun.
Yeah,
that's really rad, man. That's cool.
And you're not pushing into it, right? I
100%.
think the whole lockdown elbows thing and driving into the gun, I think that's no bueno, man. I think that creates a shitload of tension, and it's not consistent with how the gun returns back to recoil. So unlock those elbows, relax your shoulders, and just bring the gun up to your eyes. Allow your elbows and shoulders to act kind of like shock absorbers, right? Give recoil a place to go that's consistent rather than trying to hard stop it. So there you go.
100%.
I think that was the shortest grip speech we can ever give.
Yeah. Yeah, guns, generally speaking, gun's going to go somewhere, right? And so if you lock the elbows out, where's it going to move? It's going to move in your wrist now. And so now the gun tends to really not be flat and not return, very, very consistently. Now I think there's some dudes, right? Especially if you're, shooting weak 9mm loads and you're a big guy or whatever, that can do the lock the elbow thing out and make it look pretty good. But it falls apart even worse when they start trying to do that on the move, right? Because now you really have no shock absorption in there at all, and it gets even more difficult for sure. So I think, like you guys were saying, lack of tension and just relaxing in general is going to be your friend for sure. Good stuff. The follow-up question to that from someone entirely else was deep, all in capital letters, dive into recoil management. So obviously, I mean, the vast majority of your recoil work comes from your grip. So we've talked about that a little bit already, but a couple interesting points I figured we could maybe explore a little bit. So when you guys are shooting your gun, I know Brennan and I talked a little bit about this last week, which I thought it might be interesting to follow up on it. What do you think is required in terms of recoil management? Are you having to actually put an impulse into the gun to return it to zero, or do you think you can just pull your trigger and allow the gun to return to zero and it should just come back by itself?
It needs to come back by itself. I think the whole input into the gun thing is a freaking, it's a lie. It's a lie from the devil, and I don't think it's very good at all.
Dang. That's funny. That's funny. Yeah.
I don't know who does that, by the way. Like who would push who tries to push the gun down? Is that a thing?
It's definitely a thing.
Really?
It's definitely a thing.
A lot of people.
I definitely do it. You know, guys like JJ do it for sure. I've seen him have failure to fires and the gun dips down, right?
You mean like a little bit, not like
a little bit. And so here's I want to clarify. This is why I want to explore it, right? So here's kind of my theory on it, right? If your grip is right and you don't do anything, the gun should essentially return to zero by itself. But you can probably get that to happen a little bit faster with a little bit of help. That's kind of the way I think about it. I think that's how it works for me in my grip anyway. You know, if I have an unexpected failure to fire, you'll see the muzzle dip a little bit. It happens after the shot breaks, after the shot breaks, for sure. But definitely a little bit of an impulse there. I think for me anyway. I think it's a little bit different, you know, for everybody. I think everybody does a little bit differently, but regardless, I do think, you know, if you should have the ability to turn that off, and your grip should, you know, allow the gun to return to, presuming everything's balanced well and so on and so forth, return to zero by itself. But I do feel like I can get it to return to zero faster with just a slight post ignition impulse there. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, but when you get a failure to fire, you're only pushing the gun down maybe a half of an inch.
Yeah.
So I've actually heard people say, as the gun comes up, push it back down. Gun comes up, push it back down, type thing.
Mm-hmm.
I would say that's pretty freaking horrible. A little bit of a push. I don't know. I probably have that too.
Yeah.
So I know a guy, really good shooter. Recently kicks my butt at matches. He shoots that way, like legit. Like when the gun is in recoil, he pushes it down, right? And when he gets trigger freeze, his gun dips a lot. And when he mistimes his trigger, he misses low left. Now he's like a really good shooter, right? He's an M-class shooter. Okay. Can bill drill the crap out of, like, you know, he can shoot his gun really well, but he does that to help him bring the gun back. And we've had some pretty long talks about it. I think
he misses low left when what happens?
So like if he's shooting bill drill, right, and he gets out of timing with his trigger to where like he like misses the trigger pull or something like that, or a little bit of trigger freeze, his gun will have recovered too far down sometimes, right? If he thought he had the trigger press and it wasn't there. I think that's, now, like I said, like he's a really good shooter, right? I think that's a detriment if you're pushing into the gun that hard, right?
Yeah.
Now, I think if you're pushing into the gun to the point where, you might get a little bit of dip, right? But you're like not going out of the alpha, like that might be different. I struggle with the idea of, and you know, I don't often disagree with GMs, but when I do, right? Like how much faster do you think I would like be returning? So I don't push into the gun at all, right? How much faster do you think I'd actually be getting that gun returned and ready to go if I was? Right? Like, I don't know. I think it's something that is partially like people have put in a million reps on, right? And because really, like, if that's what you do, then you do that every trigger pull, right? Which is a lot of reps, right? I used to do it more than I do now, but when I figured out like chilling out with that strong hand, my return was perfect, and I didn't feel like I needed to add anything extra, right?
I'd be interested to see you try to do a sub like 1.5 build drill with ball and dummy, and just to see what happens.
Yeah.
For the record, I don't normally recommend ball and dummy for anything, but this would just be an interesting exploration just to see what happens. You know what I mean? I would. I just feel like there may be a little something there, but I could be wrong.
Maybe, yeah, you're right. Maybe there's something there that I'm not perceiving. I'm pretty sure there's not, but I could be wrong. Might have to do that.
Interesting. Yeah. Super interesting stuff. For sure. But what do we think about elbow torque?
Which way?
What? Anyway.
Yeah. I don't like pulling. I don't like the whole upside down horseshoe thing. I feel like that pulls hands off of the gun. So in other words, trying to take your elbows and pull up like that. That typically pulls the support hand off the gun, especially when someone doesn't have super strong hands. I like
Pinkies
elbows
especially.
down. Yeah, exactly. I like elbows down. And the reason that I like elbows down, kind of like what we went over before, it gives recoil a place to go. And I can also squeeze a little bit with my chest. And by a little bit, I mean like a little bit, right? I'm not like trying to bench press here, right? I'm just squeezing a little bit with my chest. And it's super easy effort to put into the gun. I don't get fatigued at all doing it. So that's kind of why I like bent elbows down.
Yeah. I've played around with all of them. I feel like for me, the elbows down thing anatomically doesn't work. So if I go from a kind of a neutral elbow position, it's like, man, as soon as I bring the elbows down at all, I feel like my biceps are literally like squeezing my rib cage and they just have like nowhere to go. And I'm like fighting myself. I feel like I'm literally like squeezing my chest with my arms. It's super uncomfortable. But what's undeniable is so for folks that are wondering why we're even talking about this, I mean, when you add just a little bit of torque with those elbows, it really is pretty impressive the amount of kind of vice grip clamping pressure you can get, especially low on the grip, which can cause the gun to be pretty interesting. I shot with the upside down horseshoe grip for a very long time, but I definitely agree that like squeezing really, really tight, especially with your support hand pinky, is absolutely required. It doesn't, and again, there's like you're talking about with the chest being a little bit of pressure. Like I think when you're doing the upside down horseshoe, it doesn't take much, right? If you're doing it enough that your hands are coming off, that's obviously not worth it. But it is interesting. It was always interesting to me how much quieter the dot would be sometimes with the upside down horseshoe versus just like a kind of a neutral grip. What I've been exploring with a lot recently is more just like front to back torque. So really just thinking about, clamping the hands together kind of into the back strap of the gun, which is a little bit of a new pressure dynamic that I haven't played with a lot for over the years, but I've been playing with it a lot recently. It's some pretty interesting results. I haven't got it all figured out yet, but yeah, leverage can do some interesting things for sure.
For me, like a couple things, right? So when I torque the elbows up, right, I use it that way. And Billy, to your point, I 100% agree that if your pinkies are strong enough to keep your hand on the gun and not give up friction, and you can still apply torque towards the top, for me that results in a little bit less recoil for me, right? However, what does it give up for me, right? So for me, it induces some shoulder tension that I've tried really hard to figure out how to do this without inducing shoulder tension, and I still induce it. It's slight, but it's there. And I don't like lifting up on things with my shoulder muscles, right? Like that is not where I'm strong. Like I'm strong coming down onto something, right? So for that reason, right, you can go up or down with it. I prefer to go down because over time, like that just feels less stressful, less tension to like my upper body. Like that's one of the, I would say that's probably the main reason. And then that allows the rest of my body to stay relaxed enough to the point where I can execute things to a high level over a long period of time. But for some people who like do that, like Billy, I think you have a little bit of a just a slight lift, right? Obviously, like it doesn't hold you back, right? But that's super uncomfortable for me. That's where a lot of this stuff is super subjective, right? Different things work for different body types, 100%, right? But for me, I've just found kind of the same way Nick does, right? Really dropping the elbows and the shoulders. I like that. I dig that a lot. I think it has a little bit better return to zero as well.
That wrap thing that you were talking about, Billy. So I do that too, and I think the reason why that works is because you're still able to keep, obviously not a whole lot of tension with your shooting hand, and that your support hand is then pulling into your shooting hand, which makes your shooting hand fingers wrap around the gun without having to squeeze.
Yeah.
And then what I'm able to do, what I notice is I'm able to lock my shooting hand wrist a lot easier when I do that. So like if I just grip really, really strong, it's really hard for me to lock out my right wrist. But if I pull, like you were talking about, pull your fingers around and kind of clamshell at the back of the grip, that right wrist is completely like locked out without having to put tension into my right hand.
Yeah.
Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I say I haven't got it completely figured out yet because so an interesting thing that I find is if I do like too much torque in that regard. I mean, obviously, if what I'm doing with my hand is essentially my firing hand, right, is essentially torquing it on the gun like this a little bit, right, to kind of clamp into the back. What that's essentially doing is kind of contracting the muscles on this side of the forearm, pulling it this way, which is essentially the exact opposite of pulling the trigger. So I find that if I do it too much, I start to lose dexterity in the trigger finger. For me, which is kind of interesting.
I'll put pressure into the back of it like that with my support hand, but I'm not really changing anything about my firing hand. Are you guys saying that like you actually adjust so that both palms are going into it, or am I missing?
No. So that if you wrap with your support hand, and you're clamshelling kind of at the back, right? Meaning, so this comes around like that, right? Then you can completely like lock this wrist. Like that thing won't move. But if I solely just grip with my support hand, that wrist doesn't lock anymore. But if I pull and kind of clamshell at the back of the gun, that wrist then locks out and this hand stays really, really loose like I want it to be. That's the only way I can make that happen. Otherwise, like this wrist stays unlocked and the gun kind of goes up into the right during recoil. So that might be the freaking missing link for you there, Brennan. Might keep the gun a little flatter for the gram, and and still have a lack of tension.
Yeah,
I don't know. It's worth trying, I think.
I need to play around with that because I do feel like I put a good bit of pressure kind of right back into this part of the gun right here, right? But I think I need to maybe play around with, just play around with it some more. It's fun stuff, interesting stuff.
Yeah,
there's a bunch more in here. We're not going to get into all of them. Obviously, we're running short on time. Some random guy named Vortex Edge asked, "Who's a better shooter, Brennan or Chris?" I don't know what that was all about.
Obviously, me.
Had to be Cody.
That Chris guy has a lot nicer facial hair, though.
He do be having the good facial hair. He do be looking operator AF.
Yes. No doubt. Let's do this. Beginner's advice when it all seems overwhelming, gear, training, etc. What to focus on. So I think this is super interesting, right? So when you're first starting in shooting, what to focus on. Interestingly enough, if this helps direct your initial thoughts, this may or may not come from somebody who's wearing a chest rig in their profile picture. So what to focus on when you first start shooting? What are your guys' thoughts?
Not
that guy's actually taken a couple of classes of mine. I think he does.
I picked up on that.
He does. Man, what's the competitions where like you lift and shoot?
Tactical games.
Yeah, that's what he does. He does tactical games. Super nice cat.
Cool.
I don't know. I think in terms of tactical games, right? If I was going to go do tactical games, which I do not have the physique for at this moment, but if I did, I would, when I got to the range, I would 100% focus on shooting and not so much like gear or lifting or any of that stuff. Make sure when you are at the range, it is range time for shooting, right? I think it's super, super important. I would not mix the two when I go to the range. I would not try to lift, wear all my kit, and shoot. Maybe there is a time for that, maybe like the week before the match or something, trying to put it all together.
Sure.
But for the most part, when I got to the range, I would work on marksmanship and speed.
Yeah, it's kind of like trying to get faster and more accurate at the same time, right?
Like speeding up, getting your hit.
You can't learn how to shoot and learn how to shoot while fatigued at the same time. Learn how to shoot first, build up that skill, and then figure out how to maintain that level of performance under physical stress. Right? I think that would be a great way to approach it. But in general, right? So I think that the tactical games thing is interesting because I think I often say like the answer to most of the questions I get on social media is for what. Right. So like what are you trying to accomplish? What are your goals? What is that? Why are you shooting in the first place? If you're just getting into shooting and you are getting into shooting because you want to conceal carry, don't buy a duty belt. Like right off the bat, right? Like buy a gun, like buy a good concealment holster, buy some magazines and some ammo, and go to the range and shoot with the gear that you actually want to learn how to use, right? It seems like every class I put on, my basic entry level pistol core type classes, we encourage folks to run the gear that they actually use. So if that's a duty scenario and you want to run your duty gear, like cool, right? If you're doing it for concealed carry and you want to run your concealed carry gear, cool. And inevitably there is the guy that will be shooting me DMs who's never shot before and wants to know whether he should be buying, STAT Kaiwis or G Code Scorpions for his new, double alpha, range belt. I'm like, bro, when are you going to use that other than in my class, right? And so I think keep it simple. It would be the biggest advice I would have as far as when things seem overwhelming, you don't know where to start. Like keep it simple. Why are you doing this to begin with? What are your priorities? What are your scenarios? What are you trying to accomplish? And then just work on that, right? You don't to learn how to shoot a pistol. You don't need plate carriers and helmets and night vision, and you really don't, right? Like you need a pistol and a holster and some magazines. So don't overcomplicate things. Keep it simple. At least at first. If you want to add on things over time, great, absolutely, go for it. Knock yourself out. But
yeah, like, dude, that was pretty much exactly what like I tried to do, right? Like, the reason I bought a gun in the first place was to conceal carry, and so I put in like a shit ton of time and reps on my concealed carry stuff. It was super important to me to like get sub-second out of like AIWB and all this stuff, right?
Right.
Like now, right? So I teach classes for a living, right? I like to shoot competition as often as I can, right? So for what I do, 90% or more of that is from an outside the waistband belt, right? And so I put in a lot of time on a belt rig, right? Also, having gained some perspective, I don't find that having a blazing fast 0.7, 0.6 draw from concealment is necessarily what I need, right, to be effective in a defensive scenario, right? Tested that with UTMs and scenario-based training and things, and it's pretty rare that you get the opportunity to just blaze a draw like that, right? So, but once the gun's out of the holster and all the shooting stuff, where you're like seeing things and pulling the trigger and doing all that, like that all directly translates. And so I would also encourage people, don't get too caught up in like going back the other way, being like, oh yeah, well, like I rarely shoot competition, but I carry every day, so 85% of my training needs to be from AIWB. Well, not necessarily, man. Like you can rep that out, spend some time on it for sure, especially when you're getting started. Don't be afraid to jump to other stuff and stay sharp with dry fire, right? But do what's gonna also make you good at the thing that you're trying to do, right? And if that's like shooting or being fast and accurate, I don't see any reason to not set yourself up for success on the range. Get more out of your range session by having a really convenient setup with guns and mags and things like that. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, no, 100%. Like you said, I think starting off and building that foundation of skills is super important.
Yep.
Eventually you might get to the point, like you were saying, Brennan. Like I don't think I've gone to the range and specifically worked on my draw in a very long time, right?
Never.
Like probably in the last year, right? I may have to again soon. More and more people seem to be reverse engineering my scoop plug hybrid situation thing. So I may have to figure out the next big thing at some point here before too long. But for right now, like when I go to the range, the draw is not what I'm concerned about. And so all the noisy parts of the shooting, that I'm working on, are essentially unaffected by whether or not the gun came out of an open, out of a belt holster or into the waistband holster, right? It does not really affect the shooting part at all. And so if it's more convenient for me to throw on a belt with, 4 mag pouches and 4 more mags in a dump pouch and, a handy IFAK right there and, different things I want to have on me, then cool. It's not a disadvantage for the priorities that I'm trying to accomplish in my training. So yeah, that for a quick side note for all the people that think everyone that ever wears a holster on a belt that, isn't a cop is a LARPer or whatever. But yeah, so I don't know. Hopefully that was helpful. Not too sure where that question could go a bunch of different ways.
Mm-hmm.
But this last one was interesting. I'm interested to see if you guys can decipher it better than I can. I'm not exactly sure where this was going, but problem solving at speed compared to slow and deliberate. It's an interesting question that's tough to decipher, primarily because of the fact that I never do anything slow and deliberate ever. I'm always so by slow and deliberate, I'm assuming this guy, because I know he's a good shooter, is referring to higher difficulty shots, more precision shooting, maybe farther shots at distance, and so on and so forth. But I am still always trying to make those shots in the required accuracy as quickly as I possibly can, right? So there's really no such thing as slow. It's just that the shot process might take longer to execute at 100% speed. So the problem solving, I don't know if it's super different as far as when unexpected things happen. I don't know. What do you guys think?
Yeah, so I know the guy who asked this. Mm-hmm. He's taking a class with me.
Yep.
And so I talk to him on a regular basis. So I feel like I know. I think he's asking about like vision stuff. Okay. So the way I try to put it is like, if you're driving 55, 60 miles an hour, okay, and you look out the side window at the lines on the road look like they're hauling ass. Yes. Mm-hmm. Looks like they're hauling, right? But if you don't slow down, right, you could even pick up the pace and look out at the lines on the road, and they seem like they're going slower. And you can even pick specific spots on those lines on the road as you're going faster, right, and see them in detail. I think to me, that's what we're trying to accomplish with the whole visual aspect, the whole visual aggression of shooting. I'm not trying to slow down my shooting, and I'm not trying to slow down my feet. What I'm trying to do is keep my eyes up and see more a lot sooner. And the only way to do that is to keep your eyes up. And I think so many people get locked into or trapped into like looking down, whether they're looking down at the gun or looking down at where their feet are going to go. It's like, man, to me, that is like never a great thing to do a ton of, right? I'm not saying I don't look down at the gun for, gun handling skill, reload, whatever. Yeah, I'll take a quick glance at it. But like, if I'm running to a position, the answer is not looking at the gun, right?
Sure.
Take a quick peek at where your feet are going to go, and that target, and specifically where you're going to aim on that target, is going to tell you exactly where your feet need to go. So I feel like that's what he's saying, just because I know him. I think he's talking about the visual aspect. So hopefully that helps him out a bunch.
My man has finally switched over to the vision game, and I'm happy about that.
Man, me too. Me too.
Yeah, no, good stuff. I think folks out there as well. I think as far as being able to problem solve at speed, as far as being able to observe unexpected things that happen that you couldn't plan for and figure out the best course of action to achieve an optimal result, right? Super important that the stuff you're doing with the gun is kind of on autopilot, right? It's kind of existing in the subconscious space.
Yeah.
If you're having to think about every single thing that you're doing with the gun, it leaves limited bandwidth left over to solve problems. Things that may be happening downrange or around you. And I'm not just talking about like gunfighting. I'm talking about when a swinger behaves differently than you expected it to, or whatever it is, right? You can't analyze those problems and figure out how to solve them if you're busy thinking about, which wall of your trigger you are currently prepped to, or whatever it is, right? You can only kind of think about one thing at a time. So
was that for Glock shooters?
Maybe a little bit. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, whatever it is, right? That's why we all harp on, ingraining the fundamentals of marksmanship into subconscious skill. Super important.
Only thing I'd add there is, in order to solve problems at speed, right? I'm a big believer in the idea that you have to present a problem for you to solve at speed, right? So like if you're trying to process what your sights are doing in like under recoil quickly, but you only ever shoot slowly, when you see them, when you're shooting fast and then you start trying to process information at that speed, it's not going to go well, right?
Yep.
And so that's where like a lot of instructors will do the thing where they take away the target, right? And you're shooting the berm, or you get right up on that thing, right? So that you can't miss it. You're still putting rounds in it, but you're paying attention to other things, right? The way I do it with people, like in like a basic recoil management or multiple shots type block of instruction, is get them close to the target, and I have them pull that trigger a lot of times, right? So something like doubles or something like bill drills or something like that. And I'm like, I don't really care about your shots right now. I want you to be aware of what your sights are doing, right? And keep shooting until you can tell me what your dot's doing or what your front sight's doing, right? And I think that's important too, because there were some things that I felt like, oh, like that's just something I just can't do, right? Until I tried it and failed, and I was like, yeah, that sucked. Okay, do it again, right? And then I started seeing stuff like, oh, like, yeah, now I'm starting to pick up something that I wasn't seeing before, right? Because I've actually put that problem in front of my face multiple times, and now I'm recognizing patterns, and now I'm starting to pick out more granular things about that problem solving thing, whatever that is, right? Whether that's a stage or a single target. So I would also say just don't be afraid to kind of push the limits like that, and just try to almost unlock yourself from your body and just kind of observe what's going on, and then take notes on that, tweak some things, and see how that changes. So that's it.
Good stuff. All right, fellas. I think that'll just about do it. I think we've covered a good number of them. We might save a couple of these in here that are still will still be some good conversation, and save it for some various questions of the week coming up. So hold out hope if we didn't get yours here tonight, or if you need an answer and a quickness, feel free to just DM any of us directly, and I'm sure we can provide some good help for you in the meantime. For now, I think that'll do it for this episode of Speed Up and Get Your Hits. All of our information will be down below. If you're not already aware of Nick and Brennan or following these guys, please make sure you do so on the social medias and all the things. And if you get a chance to train with these guys, definitely do so. You will you'll not regret it. So anyway, we will see you guys on the next episode. Thanks.